come to a halt because of the limitations and restrictions of the occupation itself. You cannot build institutions and you cannot build a sovereign system when you have no freedom and no sovereignty and no control. So here we are. It could be a stalemate. It could be the end of Oslo, but it could be, again, a new opening. Many of you remember in the I'm not going to say many of you, there are many younger people here. In 1968-69, I would like to see more students as well. We proposed the one-state solution. It was a conscious proposal. I was then in the General Union of Palestine Students, and we thought after the '67 war that wars have been disastrous. Let's think of different ways, and let's think of inclusive solutions. So we proposed the one-state solution. We said it was the democratic, non-sectarian, some people called it secular, state of Palestine in which Christians, Jews, Muslims, believers, non-believers can live in peace and harmony and democracy in historical Palestine. Of course, it was turned down immediately because the whole concept was to build, by the Zionist concept, was to build an exclusively Jewish state or predominantly Jewish state, but and at the same time the denial of statehood to the Palestinians. Many of you don't remember that even the term statehood or sovereignty or even Palestinian people were terms that we were not allowed to use. The question of self-determination was not applicable to Palestinians, even when we started negotiations. In the 1970s, there was an attempt at launching some sort of peace process. In '74, the Geneva conference, in which the Palestinians were supposed to be subsumed by an Arab delegation. There's no such thing as Palestinian. Remember Golda Meir then. Later on, even when we started talking with Schultz, when he tried to talk to us, we refused to talk to him. We said, we have an address, the PLO, a national identity, national address, talk to them. He refused. He came to Jerusalem to see us. He ended up talking to an empty room. I don't know if you remember that. But when George Bush, the father, and James Baker came to launch the peace process, it was very clear that we were to be treated within the constraints of the Camp David Accords signed between Egypt and Israel under the auspices of the US and Jimmy Carter then, that the Palestinians can get some autonomy, and they can get some self-government. But there was no discussion on the issue of self-determination, sovereignty, freedom, statehood. None whatsoever. And when we started negotiating, I was in charge of negotiating with the American delegation that was probably much more Israeli or Zionist than the Israeli delegation at that time. They certainly would not entertain anything outside this concept of giving the Palestinians autonomy. And I remember telling James Baker that in our lexicon, autonomy is a dirty word, in the same way as process has become a dirty word. That we don't want autonomy under occupation, we want freedom, we want sovereignty, we want self-determination. Even the letters that they gave us were on non-paper because I joked then that we were a non-people. The term people we were not allowed to use in addressing the Americans and the Israelis because the Israelis insisted there were Arabs in Israel, but they did not want to acknowledge the Palestinian identity. The Americans transformed us into people and an adjective. Everything has to be Palestinian, but no Palestine. Never mentioned the term Palestine. Again, in negotiations, that was one thing they refused to acknowledge, that we were trying to achieve statehood, independence, freedom, sovereignty, and so on. It was managing the situation so that Israel can have security while it controls the lives of Palestinians, not running the lives. We can run our lives, they said, but we cannot exercise sovereignty or decisions that affect our own relationship to the land, to the culture, to the history, and to our future. So I'm giving you this background just so you'll know what a struggle it was to become not just Israel and Palestinians, that's what we were, not to become a subset of Israeli Jordanian delegations or negotiations, not to be an agenda item, and we were an agenda item in negotiations, but to become a people with the right to self-presentation, representation, and self-determination. And ironically, when we got the world to recognize finally the Palestinian right to statehood, independence, self-determination, and when we got a peace process launched, or a peace initiative, whatever exercise, on the basis of implementing the two-state solution in the sense that the Palestinian state can exist on 22% of historical Palestine, which is the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza, Israel, by this manipulation of the process and everything I talked about yesterday, managed gradually to erode the chances of establishing the two-state solution by destroying the territorial foundation of the Palestinian state, by continuing with its settlement activity, settlement expansion, land confiscation, by superimposing an infrastructure on the West Bank, and by the exercise of extraterritoriality, as I said yesterday, linking the settlements directly to Israel, transforming Palestinian realities in the West Bank into peripheral realities, marginal, and the major roadworks that are built on Palestinian land, on confiscated Palestinian land, are certainly apartheid roads because they are to be used only by the settlers, only by Israelis, linking them to Israel, while we, the indigenous population, so to speak, are not allowed to use roads on our own land. So this creation of a deliberate, and it is an apartheid system. I know the Israelis are some Israelis, not all of them, are sensitive to the use of the term apartheid by saying it doesn't exist. Many of our South African friends tell us our apartheid is much worse than theirs because we are being totally displaced and replaced, as I quoted Ilan Papi as saying. Even the settlements next to Palestinian villages and towns borrow the names of the Palestinian villages and towns so that they will compete with them on the legitimacy and the history. This is a cultural displacement as well as a historical revisionism, so to speak, of Palestinian history. So now, the struggle for Palestinian statehood, freedom, sovereignty, the land, and so on, identity, so that we can be on par with everybody else. Because we kept saying, throughout the Middle East, there is one state missing. It's not that, as we said in our Madrid speech, it's not that there is one people superfluous in the region, the Palestinian people. It is that there is one state missing, which is the state of Palestine. And the world now has come to that recognition. It is no longer sacrilege to talk about Palestine as a noun. It is no longer taboo to talk about sovereignty, statehood, independence, and so on. And we're trying to catch up with the rest of the world, as you know, since everybody is moving beyond the sort of confines of states and moving towards more regional agreements and so on. So now that, ironically, we have what we call a global consensus on the two-state solution, and some people dispute that, but that's another school of thought, that there is no global consensus. But in terms of officialdom, there is, at least. In the UN, there is a recognition of that. Now we are seeing the end of the two-state solution on the ground, effectively. This expansion, this destruction of the territorial contiguity, of the viability of the Palestinian state without its resources, without its land, even with transforming the demography into population centers disconnected without the possibility of national institutions and so on. Is it time to abandon that hope and to say, now that it's finished, we are looking for other solutions? Now, there are different ways of looking at this. Some people, and I don't want to give an answer, I'm just saying that there are some people who say the one-state solution is a de facto outcome of Israeli policies, in the sense that it has destroyed the two-state solution, so they left us no option. And we have to find the best way of dealing with this de facto outcome and of preventing Israel from totally destroying or getting rid of the Palestinians, but it means that the Palestinians will have to transform their struggle from a struggle for independence, national identity, sovereignty, and so on, into a struggle for equal rights, civil rights, and so on. There are others who say that we shall use the one-state solution as scare tactics, to scare the Israelis in order to rescue the two-state solution. There are those who are saying that. Let's talk about, if you do not, and that's now the currency in political parlance in New York right now. If you do not, let go of the Palestinians, you will end up with a one-state solution, and the Palestinians can outnumber you in the year 20-something, and therefore you will have to let go of some Palestinians for the sake of preserving the purity of the Jewish state. I do not subscribe, as I said yesterday, to such an approach, because I don't believe in, not just in scare tactics, but I don't believe in exclusivity of any state, whether it's Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. And I believe it's a question of rights. It's a question of the Palestinian people's right to live in freedom and to end the occupation and to build their own state. So I do not want to use either racist arguments or exclusive arguments or sexist arguments as scare tactics in order to tell people you have to do what is right or you have to give me my minimal rights. I believe that there has to be a commitment to ending this occupation and to letting the Palestinians go free. But I do not doubt that there is a third school, and people who think of the one state as an ideal solution. And in all seriousness, they think of it as the best solution available, in the sense that it resolves all the issues. The Palestinian refugees' right of return, they will come to their state, the fact that political boundaries must not separate people, the fact that Palestinians and Israelis are there to stay, nobody's going to disappear, the fact that democracy is a very attractive one person, one vote sort of appeal, and so on. Now, there are answers to all these. I can tell you that if you tell the American administration that we want a one-state solution and the one person, one vote, they will drop you like a hot potato if they can, because they get their cues from Israel. And Netanyahu has been saying it is the Jewishness of the state that counts. That's it. And because we've seen how Israel managed to create such an intricate and sophisticated system of discrimination against its own citizens who happen to be Palestinians, that I do not think that they will lack the means of dealing with the demography in very simple ways. I don't want to answer all the arguments, but I would say there are arguments for and against all these three different approaches to one-state solution. To me, I will give you my preferred solution, which is we have to end this occupation because it is immoral, illegal, and cruel. And we have to give the Palestinians freedom. We need our freedom. Now, what we do with that freedom, then freely re-engaging with other people in the region, that is our choice. But you cannot maintain the occupation, maintain the Palestinians in a situation of captivity, and then tell them, okay, now you have to struggle to gain equal rights in a hostile state that uses absolute power, uncontrolled, unaccountable power, to get rid of you, to take your land, to take your resources while you're sitting there. And I said yesterday, rather facetiously to some friends, maybe they will let us open our casinos in the end. And when, after we become our reservations, and when they opened the casino in Jericho, I said, you see, that's the beginning. It's a joint venture, a casino in Jericho, Israeli, Palestinian, and Austrian, I think, right? So in a sense, trying to tell the Palestinians that your options are limited to what is acceptable or what is scary to Israel, and that you have to deal with your state of captivity or second or third class, not just citizenship, but humanity, because we have been in many ways dehumanized and we have been deprived of the most basic human rights, is not doing anybody any justice. It seems to me there has to be what I call a historical redemptive move. There has to be a redemption of Palestinian history, a recognition of a Nakba and what it means, a recognition of the dual state of dispossession dispersion and exile on the one hand, and of occupation and enslavement on the other, and oppression on the other.